Most of us view the past through a detached lens. We treat it as a collection of dates, dust, and dry pages that have no bearing on our modern lives. We memorize names of dead kings and locations of ruined capitals to pass a test, treating thousands of years of human struggle like isolated trivia. This perspective ignores the reality that these were thriving, chaotic, and highly complex living systems. Looking at these remnants as mere artifacts is a dangerous oversight. It obscures the active blueprint they leave behind, a consistent rhythm of expansion and decay that is currently mapping our own trajectory. We look at our modern skylines and feel untouchable. Because we can build towers of glass and steel that touch the clouds, we assume we have escaped the vulnerabilities of our ancestors. This is the illusion of permanence, the hardwired assumption that the global structure we inhabit is the final stage of human development, destined to last indefinitely without consequence. This chart visualizes a different reality. Historical data indicates that human progress follows a repeating sequence. Every civilization moves through a specific, documented life cycle. Understanding that cycle is a practical necessity. It provides the necessary context to gauge our own civilization's position on that timeline. The first phase of the cycle begins with a unifying vision. Great powers are forged when a collective drive compels thousands of individuals to work toward an immense common all. Stacking over 2 million stone blocks in the desert required absolute societal cohesion, turning a fractured population into a singular, hyper-focused workforce. The Greek city-states used intellectual frameworks to achieve a similar effect. By establishing shared philosophies and democratic experiments, they wove a cultural fabric strong enough to dictate terms across the Mediterranean. This initial success generates massive wealth and consolidated power. Ironically, that same power creates the internal friction that eventually destabilizes the state. Once power is consolidated, the civilization enters its second phase. The original unifying vision is replaced by a mechanical need for absolute territorial domination. This map illustrates the expansion of the Roman state. Enforcing ever-expanding borders stretched military logistics across millions of square miles. This triggers administrative overstretch. The cost of policing and governing distant territories eventually drains the wealth those regions produce. Reaching this peak level of global control is not a victory. It is the trigger mechanism for an inevitable decline. External armies rarely bring down a healthy empire. The final phase of the cycle is driven by internal failure. It starts with internal degradation. As expansion slows, massive wealth gaps emerge. The ruling class often becomes insulated by hubris, hoarding resources while the foundations of their society rot from within. Without competent administration, the physical infrastructure fails. Waterways dry up and roads fracture because the bureaucratic maintenance systems required to run them have disintegrated. Eventually, the massive monuments of power that took generations to build are abandoned and reclaimed by the environment. The complex, resource-heavy systems required to build an empire eventually reach a scale where the society can no longer support its own weight. We look at our modern metropolitan centers and assume that this ancient cycle does not apply to us, but the patterns are familiar. Our era of trade and digital networks has wired the planet into a single cohesive economic engine, much like the unifying visions of the past. We currently operate at the apex of control. We rely on hyper-extended logistical supply chains and corporate monopolies, a fragile complexity that requires perfect global synchronization to function. Given that we share the same overstretch and wealth inequality that preceded the fall of Rome, we must consider where we currently sit on that timeline. The life cycle of rise, peak, and fall is a documented historical pattern, driven by the constraints of administration and resource consumption. Recognizing this rhythm provides our only real advantage. Survival at the apex requires a society to address the internal costs of its power before the system fractures. The ruins of antiquity serve as a reminder to maintain our own foundations while we still have the capacity to do so. These records of the past provide a high-stakes warning for the living.